You notice it in small moments. When conversations feel louder than they should, and silence feels safer than people. You don't feel lonely, you feel relieved when you're alone. People assume that means something is wrong with you. They call it antisocial, distant, cold. But none of those words ever fully fit. You don't hate people. You just feel tired around them faster than most. And you've never been able to explain why. You've tried to be more social. You've tried to open up, to blend in, to stay longer than you wanted. And every time, it cost you something inside. Afterwards, you needed distance. Not because people hurt you in obvious ways, but because your system felt overstimulated, invaded, full. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. You started to prefer being alone not as a choice, but as a form of relief. Somewhere along the way, having no friends stopped feeling like a loss and started feeling like control. You don't miss people the way others do. Not because you're empty, but because your attachment works differently. This is the part no one warns you about. When you grow used to emotional self-containment, connection starts to feel optional. You rely on yourself by default. You process things internally, quietly, deeply. And over time, that becomes your normal. Other people fill silence with noise. You fill it with thought. And that difference slowly separates you. You start noticing things others don't. Tone shifts, hidden tension, unspoken motives. Small talk feels exhausting because it demands pretending. And pretending costs you more than it costs them. So you opt out quietly. This is where most people misunderstand themselves. They think isolation means rejection. But for you, it was regulation. Your nervous system didn't feel safe in constant interaction. Not dramatic danger, subtle overload. So it adapted. This wasn't your personality. It was survival. A quiet recalibration of what you could tolerate. Over time, your standards for connection changed. Not consciously, biologically. Your system learned to protect its energy. You became selective without meaning to. Not because you felt superior, but because shallow connection drained you. And slowly, your circle disappeared. Not in conflict, not in drama, just in quiet distance. Here's the painful part. Once you adapt to solitude, re-entering closeness feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. You didn't choose this consciously. Your nervous system did. It learned what brought peace and what didn't. This is why advice never worked. Put yourself out there. Just be more social. They were talking to your mind, but the pattern lives deeper. In the body, not the idea. You can't logic your way out of a nervous system adaptation because it was built before words. Before understanding, at some point, connection stopped feeling like nourishment. It started feeling like effort, like emotional labor without return. So your system chose efficiency. Less people, less stimulation, more internal space. And here's what you never noticed. This adaptation once saved you, but it also reshaped how you relate to the world. What saved you once is quietly isolating you now. Not out of fear, out of habit. Your independence isn't accidental. It's learned, conditioned through repetition. You became your own emotional regulator, your own witness, your own safe space. And because of that, external connection feels optional, not essential. This is where the misunderstanding deepens. People see absence of friends and assume emptiness. They confuse quiet with lack. But your inner world isn't empty. It's dense, layered, active. You live inside your thoughts more than most. You analyze, reflect, revisit. Connection happens internally first. This makes surface-level relationships feel unsatisfying, like noise without meaning, like motion without direction. So you wait, not always consciously. But your system does. You wait for depth, for safety, for resonance. And because that's rare, you end up alone more often than not. Not rejected, unmatched. This is why calling you broken never made sense. Nothing malfunctioned. Your system optimized for survival. And once you see that, the story shifts from defect to adaptation. But here's where it gets more complex. Adaptations don't stay neutral forever. They begin to shape identity. What started as protection slowly becomes preference. And preference, repeated long enough, starts to feel like truth. You tell yourself you're fine alone. And in many ways, you are. But that wasn't the original design. Humans are wired for connection, not constant contact, meaningful attunement. And when that's missing, the system adapts again. This is the quiet paradox. You don't crave people, but you crave being understood. And that craving goes unmet more often than not. So it turns inward, becoming self-dialogue instead of shared space. This is where the distance deepens. Not because you don't want closeness, but because closeness rarely meets your depth. Here's the painful part. The longer you stay adapted to solitude, the more foreign connection feels. Not dangerous, not wrong, just unfamiliar. And the nervous system avoids what it doesn't recognize. Even if that thing is healthy, even if that thing is needed, so you stay where it's predictable. Inside your own mind, where you don't have to translate yourself. This is why being around people feels effortful. You're constantly adjusting, filtering, softening, monitoring reactions before they happen. Your attention never fully relaxes. It scans, anticipates, prepares. This isn't anxiety in the obvious sense. It's vigilance learned early. A system trained to notice before it's hurt. You didn't choose this. Your nervous system did, and it chose correctly back then. But what saved you once is limiting you now. Not because it's wrong, because it's outdated. This is where most people get stuck. They confuse adaptation with identity and defend it as who they are. But you are not your defenses. You are the system beneath them. The one that learned to survive. Seeing this doesn't force change. It creates space between who you are and what you learned, and in that space, something softens. The self-blame. The question of, what's wrong with me? Because the answer was never, something is wrong. The answer was always, something adapted. Quietly, intelligently. You didn't fail at friendship. Your system learned to function without it. That's not failure, it's resilience. And resilience always has a cost. Sometimes it's closeness. Sometimes it's ease. This is where clarity replaces judgment. Not a call to isolate. Not a command to connect. Just understanding of why you are the way you are, without needing to fix it immediately. When you see yourself as adapted, not broken, something changes in how you hold yourself. Less tension, more honesty. You stop forcing connection. Stop judging distance. Stop measuring yourself by other people's needs. And in that stillness, something subtle happens. Your system feels less threatened. When there's less threat, there's less defense. And when there's less defense, options return. Not instructions. Not promises. Just possibility. You don't need to become more social. You don't need to collect people. You don't need to prove anything. You only need to understand that who you became made sense at the time, and what makes sense can also evolve. Not through pressure, but through safety. Safety changes everything. It changes how the mind opens, how the body allows closeness. This isn't about friends. It never was. It's about regulation, trust, and pace. When those align, connection doesn't feel forced. It feels natural. And until then, being alone isn't a defect. It's a phase of self-protection. So if you have no friends, pause before you judge yourself. There's a deeper story underneath. one that explains you, without condemning you, one that restores dignity. And once you see that story clearly, you don't feel broken anymore. You feel understood.